Welcome everyone to our author night here at South Pasadena Public Library. We're so thrilled to have you with us and our special speakers. This evening is going to end our citywide reading program, One City, Many Stories, that's been taking place over the last 6 weeks. My name is Kathy Billings. I'm the library director. And it's my pleasure to just give you a little background on One City, Many Stories and introduce our speakers. So I'll start by explaining that library staff developed this program to provide an opportunity for the community to explore common ground through reading and discussion. So we really hope that you've had an opportunity to read the books on our suggested reading list or take part in one of our book discussion groups. Tonight's event will feature 2 award-winning authors, Danzy Senna and Sherri, in a discussion moderated by a 3rd award-winning author, Kirchy, who is South Pasadena's Poet Laureate. I would like to briefly introduce our speakers, as I said, and I will invite our viewers to visit our website where you will find more information about these authors, as well as about One City, Many Stories and the books that are on those reading lists. During the talk, feel free to enter any questions. We will watch those as the event is happening and address those questions at the end. And so with that, I will introduce our speakers. Danzy Senna is the author of 5 critically acclaimed books of fiction and nonfiction, and her first novel, Koertge, won the American Library Association's Alex Award and was also named a Los Angeles Times Best Book of the Year. Her latest novel, New People, was one of our featured One City, Many Stories titles, and so we're thrilled to have her with us tonight. And Sherri is the author of 7 award-winning young adult novels, including the 2009 California Book Awards gold medalist, Fly Girl. And her most recent book, The Blossom and the Firefly, was also a featured One City, Many Stories title. And finally, our moderator, Kirchy, was appointed by the City Council as the first South Pasadena Poet Laureate in June 2018. And since then, we've done many things with him, and he's written many special poems for special events, including One City, Many Stories. And you can see that on our YouTube channel. He is the author of many novels, 10 acclaimed poetry collections, and a 2-time winner of the PEN Literary Award for Children's Literature. So I again welcome you. I thank our speakers so much for being with us, and I will turn this over to Ron. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Ron Kirchy, and I am the current Poet Laureate of South Pasadena. No poems tonight. I do want to start by saying how much fun I've had the last 2 or 3 weeks walking around South Pasadena and bumping into people who have read the books. And you see them in Trader Joe's, and my wife and I are walkers, or we'll see them in pavilions, in line at the pharmacy. And somebody will say, oh, gee, I really loved that book, or I read a review of that book, or what do you think about this book? Or I listened to one of the library presentations. It's been just kind of wonderfully fulfilling to have these books circulating, sort of in the air, as it were, and to bump into people. So here's the rules tonight. The first rule is I really want to have a good time. I want us to talk. I want us to get along. For you, for Danzy and Sherri, any question that comes up you don't want to answer, don't answer it. Ask questions to me or of each other. And I promise, the first thing I promise not to do is to ask you where your ideas come from, because I've heard that so many times. When we were able to travel, I used to go to high schools and middle schools mostly. And if I was on a little book tour, I'd hear it a lot. And at a certain point, I just get snarky and say, Costco, where I get everything. So that probably won't be in the air tonight. I want to start, I have some boilerplate questions, which I can show you and we'll read from. But I want to start with something not on the list. I want to start with a quotation from Flaubert, who wrote Madame Bovary, a terrific novel, if you haven't read it for a while. And here's what Gustave said: be regular and orderly in your daily life so you can be violent and original in your work. Does that resonate with you guys? Danzy, Sherri? Regular?
Yeah, definitely. I love that. I think I lived in New York actually for many years, and all of my books I've written in the West, and I finished in the West, and I find it a lot easier here to kind of find that air, that space around me to think without the constant overstimulation. And I think that's connected to what you're saying. You know, it's like you need to have a kind of routine. There's a real kind of marathon feeling to writing a novel, and you need to be able to be in that daily ritual with it. And it can be thrown off by many different factors. And so I think that kind of creating space around your thoughts and your imagination is what it's about for me. What about you, Sherri?
You know, I think that it depends. It just depends. It depends on the project. It depends on what's going on in my life, because sometimes I think, I try to show up every day and sit down and do, and sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And then you have those days where you have every other thing to do, but the ideas just keep coming. And so I think it's a little bit like you follow the muse. And some days you sit there wishing she'd show up, but yeah, it depends on where you are in the curve of the story. I think like sometimes it's just nonstop, and you wake up in the middle of the night, and you got to keep going. So I think that the madness can be in the work, but that's also sort of great.
Yeah.
Yep. For me, I mean, I may talk a little more about myself than the average moderator because we're three writers, but I won't do that too much. For me, I've been writing a lot of poetry lately. And Sherri and I were talking about this earlier. I'm just a blue collar guy. I just get up in the morning. I go to work 7 days a week. I must write 300 days a week. 300 days, no, that's a lot.
That's incredible.
300 days a year. And the only violence, so that can be violent and original, is in editing. When you write as much as I do, you know that not a lot of it is good. I just throw stuff away every day and edit with a sword. So, that's my answer.
I find I pull punches with the violence. Like anything where I have to I'm working on something now that is horror. I'm not a horror person. I'm afraid of things. And my husband was laughing at me last night. He's like, "Oh, I think this is hard for you to write because you don't want to get scared." And I'm like, that actually might be true. Yeah. So yeah, I got to take the gloves off next.
So that was a general question. Now I have a couple from the list called moderator questions. The first one is, tell us a bit about what inspired you to write the, and if you want, about your creative process. What's the start, Danzy? A little bit about what inspired you to write and a little bit about your creative process.
What inspired me to write the last book, the one that was New People, was I always want to write the book that hasn't been written yet, and the voice and world that I don't see out there. I always feel like I'm trying to write certain worlds into existence and characters I haven't met before on the page, and it's in dialogue with other works. And so for me, I was trying to write a character who was living in a very specific time of identity crises, and New York in the 90s, the sort of gentrification of Brooklyn. I always write about a world that I know, but I like to stray from the world I know and find the story that didn't happen within it, within the story that did. So when I'm thinking, it starts with autobiography and it leads to a huge digression from autobiography for me. I'm interested in straying from the truth, which is why I write fiction more than nonfiction. Yeah.
Sherri?
I would say that, for this one, it's curiosity. I write, I'm genre fluid, and I chase down a lot of things that just spark my curiosity. And Blossom and the Firefly, I came across an article about these girls serving as maids to kamikaze pilots. And I was wondering two things. One is, what does it take to make you want to, willing to take on a suicide mission? We've seen a lot of violence in the world in recent years, a lot of suicide actions. And I'm just like, well, where does that start? And then equally, what would it be like to be a 15-year-old girl who sends men off to their deaths, like every day, that without any, all the support and comfort that we try to offer kids today, just non-existent in a time of war. And so really it was just, what would it be like to walk in those shoes? Yeah, I think that's probably why I write most things. I want to travel there. Like, I want to go there. I want to be there. I want to see that.
Well, you went to Japan, right?
I did. I spent a few days running around in the location where the book is set, which I don't usually get to do. So I thought it was necessary for this, so I made sure it happened, and it was invaluable.
Yeah, Kirk has talked about they use the word meticulous, talking about your, scholarship, which I thought was an absolutely apt word. The details in that book are fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I think, my first World War II book, Fly Girl, I did a lot of research, and people seemed to respond to, all the details about it. So pilots, again, Women's Air Force Service pilots, and they really responded to that. So I wanted to make sure that I got that into this book as well. And then just to understand, I think you need as full a picture as you can get. And I do write some nonfiction. So, and my mother was a librarian, had a library science degree, and I still have all of my, Junior Britannica and Adult Britannica encyclopedias. So I was taught to do the research. So that's what I do.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions to each individual author, and then we'll go back to a general one. I got some stuff that I want to, insert. The first, for Sherri, it says, considering the theme of reconciling past with present, what elements of your story you consider to be the most relevant today?
Considering the theme of reconciling past with present,
what elements of your story do you consider to be the most
relevant today? Well, one of the things that I discovered in doing my research are there's three sides to every story. And since this is a story about Japan in World War II, I sort of had a sense of the American side of the story, and not a lot of information about the Japanese side of the story when I went into it. And what I learned was within the Japanese culture, there appeared to be three sides to the story. There's a book called The Long Defeat that is an examination of post-war Japan. And there is a story of heroism that the government puts forth. There's a story of victimization that survivors and former soldiers' families would put forth. Oh, I was just following rules. I was just following orders. And then the Japanese press in the 80s started a narrative of culpability that, we were part of this. And I think the fracture we have right now in our society here in the United States, the very divided voices we have in the political arena that's bleeding into the rest of our culture. I think in 20 years, you're going to be hearing I was just following orders, or I was towing the party line. And you're going to hear, I was a victim. And you're going to hear, wait a minute, we did this to ourselves. And so if we could be conscious of that now and maybe use that hindsight from World War II to today, what might we be able to avoid?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. For Danzy, this is a simple one. What do you want readers to take away from New People, the novel?
Oh, I never want them to take away anything that they don't take away. I mean, I don't have a message. I don't have a sort of lesson that I'm trying to teach them. It's the reader does, for me, half of the writing, and I let them interpret from it what they want. So I try to be really free and uncensored, and I write to tell a really good story. I'm always interested in kind of having the propulsion of a thriller but in a story about identity and a more intimate kind of story about people's sense of themselves in the world, but with a kind of gripping plot. So I don't have like a message. If you read the book and you come away with something, that's your message. I don't mean to be opaque about it, but I don't prescribe a message from my work.
Yeah, I was reading just today, and I wrote this down. This is from Zadie Smith. The book I know is White Teeth. He said, I express myself with my friends and my family. Novels are not about expressing yourself. They're about something beautiful or funny or clever or organic. When it comes to self-expression, go ring a bell in the yard if you want to express yourself.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. It's a really different language.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, I would feel that would be like really restricting to me as a writer to be beholden to like having a message or one sentence that I would say, because the book is the message, the story is the point of it.
Yeah, I heard an author say, if I had a message, I would write it on a note card and hand it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's how I feel.
Yeah, that's
Well,
how I
that
feel.
said, I have a question. I wonder, Danzy, like that said, have you ever had someone come to you and say, oh, I really got X out of this book? That was something that surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, I've had that in good and bad ways. Like I had someone, a really great reader, say to me that reading my work, my body of work, was the first time she really was able to see being biracial, being mixed race as its own culture. She understood herself to be part of a culture, and it's like that writing a world into existence, I think, has that power, representation, and writing someone's reality into being. But my first novel, I remember when it first came out, and it's about a mixed race family in the 70s and the 80s in New England, Black father, white mother, biracial daughters. And one of the daughters appears to look white, and one to the world appears to be Black. And the New York Times subtitle to their review said, "Two daughters of an interracial couple, one white and one Black." And they kept repeating that throughout the article. And I thought, wow, you really did not read my book if that's what you're coming out of this with. So, yeah, I think sometimes someone can say something and you're like, oh my God, I'm so excited that you took that from it. And I didn't even think about that. And then sometimes they're like, what book did you read?
Yeah.
I wrote an early book, a kid's book called The Arizona Kid. And the boy, 16, he goes to Arizona, goes to Tucson, blah, blah, blah. And one of the reviews said, this book could have taken place anywhere.
Right.
And the title would have worked.
Yeah, I know. So West Virginia Kid. You can't wait. Spinning off of what Danzy just said, I have a quote from Connie Dawes, a poet. He talks about literature offering us the capacity to carry in us and express the contradictory impulses that make us human. And I just really like that. Books that I like, you guys' books, other books that I like, are never just point to point. They're just they clash, people do. I mean, when we talked about new people, it was a library talk, and there were a bunch of us, and we were able to chat. And everybody just thought, oh, Maria, don't go back out on that fire escape. What are you up to? Which made one of the, there's a bunch of great scenes in that book. That was really a dandy. Both of them, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, you want your characters to do bad things. Nobody wants to read about happy characters or happy couples. Nobody wants to read about people who have it all together. It's a chance to get your characters into trouble. And that's where the interest and excitement is. And, in the rest of the world, we're all trying to be so virtuous, and fiction should be a space where the paradoxes and the contradictions, as you're saying, come to life, and people behave in ways that they don't want to or don't want to admit to, and shame, all of those things are interesting in fiction.
Yeah.
And what about you in terms of that, Sherri? Do you feel?
Oh, I think that being honest. I write for young adults, and being honest is key. And so all of those messy things. I get gleeful when I can write a character who does terrible things, because I try to be. I'm such a Girl Scout, so it's sort of like, oh, I wish I could have said that, And so that's really fun. But I think, showing humanity. Just being human, I think is fascinating. And for teen readers who are trying to figure out what that all means, I think that's where the honesty of how messy it can be really needs to come in,
I would think, especially with that age group, it's really liberating, and that's really what they want to read, is that truthful.
Yeah, they want someone to tell them what's actually going on, and a book will do that, but an adult will not quite often.
I have a book, it sounds like I'm bragging here, but I have a book called Stoner and Spaz. It's the most stolen book in any YA library.
Because you're telling it like it is.
Yeah, the girl is addicted to marijuana. She's got a potty mouth. So kids just take it home. They just don't check it out. They just take it home.
Yeah.
That's
nice. This is back to the general stuff, and then I'll do one more each. This is, how much do readers expect authors, you guys, me, to accurately reflect the whole of a culture, and how do authors meet those expectations? How much do readers expect authors to accurately reflect the whole of a culture? Boy, that's a mouthful. And how do authors meet those expectations if they do?
What do you say, Sherri?
I'm curious to hear. I'm curious to know how it is in the adult literary arena, but that's a really big issue in kidlit these days, is own voices and writing within your lane. And I have never stuck to one lane because I'm curious about the world, and writing is one of the ways that I explore it. So it all depends on who your audience is. Someone who has no experience of the culture you're writing about might assume that's it. She must have presented the whole thing. Whereas someone who's intimately a part of the culture might be like, you got this completely wrong, or maybe you got it right. So my goal is to do the best job I can and be a good house guest if I'm visiting another culture. And so for this book, I took some Japanese lessons. I did go to Japan. I have so many research books. I talked to people. I had somebody read through the book for the use of Japanese language. I had somebody else who is Japanese and writes World War II to look at the book. And I had met people on the journey that I did not want to horrify with what I created. So I try to do that. I try to do the work to be respectful, and that book is even it started off with a Japanese story structure. I wanted to pay honor to what it was, start to finish. I don't do that everywhere.
It's the 4-act structure.
It is, yeah, Kisho Tenketsu. So I started there, and then I tweaked with it because I knew it had to be palatable for American teens to read. But I wanted it to have that feel, and so far I've gotten good feedback on it. But I haven't always been able to do that kind of due diligence. I do the best that I can with my resources, and all apologies if I do something wrong. I would actually love to learn from it.
I'll ask Danzy in a second. Did you get pushback from people who said you didn't get it? You didn't get it right?
Not on this book. No. It's been actually pretty great. I had a guide translator in Japan, and she read the book, and I was worried. And she said that she's going to use it with her tour groups now. which was sort of interesting and I tend to do enough research that when I'm walking around with a tour guide or someone, I can tell them something they don't know.
Right.
And so that's sort of my goal, like do more. And then, yeah.
So Danzy, do you get pushback? Did people ever say to you, you didn't get it right?
Well, actually, I have the opposite, which is, I mean, every book I've written has featured a biracial female protagonist. And people assume that it's autobiographical because I, on some very superficial level, resemble the character. And I'm always really pushing back against that because I think that especially for women of color writers, you get read as autobiography if you resemble the character at all. And that's something that white men authors don't have. You can write 20 books about white male protagonists, you be a white male and they'll see it as artifice or art or constructed. But if you're me and you're writing about characters who are biracial women or girls, suddenly it's just reporting from the streets of this experience. And actually the thing I'm most proud about is that it's lies and that I made it up and that it's fiction and that I did not climb out on a fire escape and stalk a man and that I could make you believe that and that I could make you feel you were there in the girl's body doing that, or that I didn't pass as white. I wrote about a character passing as white. Those are experiences I've never had. And I think you get that taken from you all the time as a writer, and you really have to protect the fact that you made it up, and that's your job as an artist, is to steal what you want from things you know and to stray from that. And all of those things are possible on the page. But as soon as you write something and you call it fiction, it's fiction.
Yeah.
That is fiction.
Yeah.
My first novel, I'm sorry, Ron.
No, go ahead.
My first novel is called Lucy the Giant, and it's about a girl. She's half Native Alaskan, half Caucasian, and very tall. And when I had my very first book launch, I showed up at the bookstore, and the bookseller looked at me and was like, "Oh, I thought you'd be taller."
It's just
Right.
short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like it had to have been you.
Yeah, I'm a tall person who can fly.
You don't have an imagination.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. No, and
Yeah.
I really refuse to accept that. And people have said to me, like, are you always going to write about biracial characters? And I'm like, do you ask white authors that are they always going to write white characters? Because somehow that's seen as universal, and mine is seen as a special category of experiences, very limited. And actually it's as universal as everything. It's humanity I'm writing about. I'm writing about people.
I was going to say, I have a poem about me working in a mattress factory when I was 18 years old. And in the course of the poem, I'm inspired to not work there, but to move and go be a writer someplace. And people have said to me, "Oh, gee, I'm really happy to hear that, because it gives me some sense of who you were when you were younger." And I say, well, I made that up.
Yeah.
And their faces fall.
Yeah.
And I've stopped saying that. I started to say, it was a hell of an experience. I'll tell you. Working in their mattress.
Right.
That's that thing about truth. Like, you want the truth to be the emotional truth. It doesn't have to be the factual.
Yeah, exactly.
Experience.
Yeah.
It's very liberating to let go of the factual and go into that other realm, I think.
Our president would agree.
I like that story.
Vote.
Not as taller, right? I thought you'd be taller. That's exactly. So this is for Sherri off of my sheet. How did you capture the layered nuances of Japanese culture and beliefs? And can you take a step beyond extensive research? I mean, I just sort of added that.
Yeah.
Of Japanese culture and beliefs.
It all began when I was a young girl in college at NYU. I took a Japanese literature and translation class in college, and it was a really tough nut to crack because I had this crazy old professor who wouldn't explain anything. We would ask him questions and he would say, "I don't know, you're supposed to teach me," which was incredibly expensive and frustrating. But reading those books, I found when I decided to write this that I knew more. I knew more about writing in general, and had more access to information. And that the feel of those stories. I remember my frustration in college was that Japanese novels never end; they just stop, and I couldn't understand why. And now I know there is this story structure, Kisho Tenketsu, which is sort of an introduction, a deepening knowledge, a twist, and then a reflection on the things you learned in the first two parts in light of the twist. And that's why they rest instead of really change. And so I wanted to work with that because it's a conflictless storytelling structure. Unlike the traditional Western 3-act structure, which is all about conflict. And it was interesting to approach a story about an actual conflict, right? World War II in a structure that had no conflict. And so I think that is the underlying thing. And then I love myth. I love fairy tales and folklore. So I'm always digging into the bones that are underneath every story we tell. And there were a few Japanese folk tales that stood out as they were turned into propaganda during the war. So they shaped the male character, the pilot character's journey. But then I was delighted to discover that there are parallels to, I studied Greek mythology when I was a kid. And there are all these parallels in Greek myths to some of the Japanese myths. So like the underworld and afterlife with rivers. And I was able to dig into that too. So I think that has something to do with it.
Okay. This is for Danzy. How does Maria's obsession with, quote, the poet reflect society's view of Black men?
Danzy, you're muted.
Oh, Danzy, you went away. Can you unmute?
Oh, you did?
You back?
There you go.
There I am.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. I didn't really think of it that way as I was writing it. But like I said, if that's what you took from it, then I'm always so interested in the way that people read the poet and project maybe that onto it. I saw him, to me, like, it was funny, actually. I was really laughing while I wrote this novel because it was so ridiculous to me that she just kept pursuing this guy and reading all of this stuff into him that he wasn't really giving her back. And I saw him as like a very specific person, more than a representative of Black men. And I saw her as a very specific person, but clearly their identities, I don't think there's any character in the world that is not racialized, doesn't have a gender, doesn't have a history, doesn't have a class background. So like, of course he is a Black male in the 90s in New York City. He's an artist. He's aloof. He's sort of bewildered by her. And I was interested also, I think, in writing against the sort of typical narratives of sort of, I was interested in female characters as like predators and onto a male character, and the sort of creepiness of Maria was really interesting to me and exciting. And I think it went against some of the types that I had read, and the type of dynamics between women and men, and especially toward Black men. And like, I'm always interested in writing something that hasn't been represented very much. And I like out of control, obsessive characters on the page, but not in real life.
True.
I have a question.
I don't want to hang out with her, but I liked her as a character.
You like to write her. You don't want to have to be with her.
Yeah.
I would hang out with her. I liked her a lot.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad.
I wonder if because he's referred to as the poet, there's like an archetype sort of label on him that then makes him seem more of a cipher for all Black artistic men. Like, you know, if you'd given him a name, said Dan, like, would that have changed people's perception? Conversely, when you talk about flipping the script, like when you have a man obsessed with a woman, nobody thinks that woman represents everything. We all sort of are used to that because there is already that archetype of the woman, the girl, the object of desire. And, you know, I think we're more likely to sort of say,
that's really true.
I'm not them. That doesn't represent me. That represents that other unattainable something.
Yeah. I mean, one of the other things that gets read into Maria, and like I said, none of this is wrong. I don't have a prescribed way of reading this book, but I've heard a lot that she seems like conflicted about her identity or her Blackness. And like, I never thought of that when I was writing her. I thought she was pretty clearly identified as a Black person. And she was very sort of funny about the fact that people saw her and didn't see her as Black. And she seemed like, and that her mother who adopted her didn't want a white baby and then got this baby that was really light skinned and was like, damn, you know, like I have to raise this like kid now. And so for me, like the comedy of it was in the forefront of my mind, but behind that are all sorts of subconscious things. And I am really interested in racial projection and how people get read when they walk into a space and how that experience of the external reading of you shapes your interior life. So all of it's true and all of it's there, I would say.
Well, that leads me into the question on down my list. Someone found the phrase tragic mulatto and wanted to know if that applied or to what degree to Maria.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't really have any interest in a character who's not tragic and like not messed up. So there is this trope of biracial characters always being written to have a terrible ending and to throw themselves off a cliff, because there was a lot of propaganda in that against interracial relationships. They wanted to show us as being intrinsically damaged and intrinsically messed up. And I'm always aware of that as a kind of type that gets written into biracial characters. But to me, I want to be able to write really damaged characters, and they are mixed race characters. And so does that make them tragic mulattoes? That would be really hard for me to write a character who had no problems. Yes. And I wouldn't want to do that. So, you know, I think that's a big burden for a writer to carry, to always have to answer to that type. And to me, my characters aren't desperate to be white. They aren't all those things that were written into biracial characters, that they are ashamed of being Black. Like no character I've written has ever felt that way. I'm writing from a character who is happy to be Black. And that's not their problem. Their problem is a human problem.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Sherri, you look like you have a question.
Yeah, I have all sorts of things. I'm like, wow.
Yeah,
it is that thing of you know, people love an issue book, especially for an underrepresented community. They're like, oh, it's got to be about the fact that you're underrepresented because of this thing. And so, you know, Danzy, I hope you just keep writing all the tragic people you want, regardless of their makeup, so that people get used to the idea that you can be completely screwed up about relationships with human beings without it being about race. And I think that's the frustration, is that they can't allow nuance if there is something, you know, visible that they can see. That's
like the burden of representation, I think, that writers of color face, and that we have to carry that weight and be positive image police and be representing our entire race, rather than writing from a point of view of an artist who's writing about an individual who, as you know, you're talking about, is screwed up because human beings are screwed up.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them interesting. So yeah, thank you for putting it that way. Yeah.
Here's a little quote from the poet Louise Gluck, who, as we speak, is polishing her Nobel Prize, probably.
She went to Goddard, one of the places I teach.
Well, you know, and birds of a feather.
There you go.
She said, I am suspicious of my existing ideas, and I only need those to get beyond them into ignorance, and then with luck, beyond that, into discovery. Ever found yourself making those steps? Existing ideas are only necessary to get beyond them into ignorance, and then with luck, into discovery.
Absolutely, for me. I mean, I often sell a story on a pitch. I can write a good, sexy pitch. It's like a movie trailer. Yeah. And then I sit down to write, and I go, wow, that won't work at all. And then you have to let go of what you thought it was going to be to discover what it actually is. And that letting go can be hard sometimes because it can be scary. Like, you know, you're like, well, I promised them this, and what's it going to be? And so, getting past that, because the story wants to be born and the story is there. And you just have to recognize. I think it's like, I don't have children, so I'm going to just I'm going to assume it's like I was a child. So I could say, like, your parents have ideas about who you will be and what you should do. And then you horribly disappoint, or you surprise, or do whatever you're going to do.
Or both.
Disappointed in that surprise. But like, that is, your stories do the same thing once you let them be who they want to be. So
I love that. Yeah, I agree.
It's true for me too. I remember going through those steps. The spinoff that I was going to ask you is a writerly question, and just kind of tangential to this. People have asked me, oh, once you get your characters established, you know who they are and you have them talking, don't they just pretty much take over and the rest of the book writes itself? Did you ever hear that? Did it ever happen? It doesn't happen to me. I mean, I have to labor over every line. They never take over and start talking, and I'm just an amanuensis writing as fast as I can. Anything?
Once that happened to me. Yes, once. I mean, sometimes it happens in little spurts, but once in grad school, I sat down with a pen and a pad, and it was like the character was standing next to me, just out of my line of sight. And they started speaking, and I just wrote it down. Did I ever publish that? No. But I wrote it down, and I finished it, and I was like, that's incredible. I hope you'll come back, but it was just the one time.
But I think dialogue is really one of the places I most come to know my characters. If I don't let them speak, I don't fully know them. So, and I think that's like, I think I struggle a lot with writing, and especially the architecture of my novels. But the place I feel most joy is in dialogue and writing how they speak to one another. And it's like the playwright in me or something, is that I want to have these long stretches of hearing them speak. And that's coming from me. And sometimes, some days, as you're saying, Sherri, it like comes easier than others, and moments, flashes of hearing them really well. But I find that's the place where I'm most intimate with them and most understand them.
Now that I've heard you say that, I'm going to, walk what I said back about myself, because there have been times when I have the momentum up and the characters are talking, and they start talking in ways that I hadn't planned. And I'm, the hair on my arm stands up. I really like that. And like you said, come back again anytime, drop by any time.
That's the rush of writing.
Yeah,
it's like
it is the rush of writing.
You suffer a lot for that moment too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's relative, but there's a struggle involved, and then you have these moments and you're very joyful about it. But
Yeah.
Imagine being an astronomer wanting to see asteroids or something go by, and you got to drag all your equipment out every night and set it up and hope it's not cloudy and hope it happens.
Yeah.
Well, I'll come down from my studio and tell Bianca, geez, I had such a good day. And in a day or so, I'll come down and she'll say, how did the work go? And I say, it was awful, awful. And then we have lunch and, the next day comes.
Yeah.
There's a little E.M. Forster quote. I just wrote all these little quotes down. E.M. Forster said that he could write partly because he lived at a slight angle to the universe. Do you feel that, Sherri?
It's interesting. I don't think I do, but I probably do. Like, when I realize that other people don't think the way I do or didn't see the thing or whatever, then I'm like, oh, maybe I am different. So, I'm sure my husband would say absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I tend to think I'm more normal than I am. And
Yeah.
I am
I think being an outsider and feeling yourself to be an outsider as a child is one of the greatest training you get to being a writer, and feeling alienated and all sorts of feelings that, you don't really like having at the time, but those are your training ground for stepping away and being able to describe the world.
Yeah. And when you're an adult, you're lucky you have found a tribe that gets you. So you don't feel as much like an outsider as an oddball as you did when you were a kid. But that doesn't mean that you aren't. It just means you found the other ones.
Island of the misfit toys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's how college was for me. I met people who were more like me, who liked what I liked and didn't think poetry was silly. And, and I thought, oh, my tribe. Well, of course, you get into that tribe and it's just multicultural inside all these white guys, It's still very different.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a quote from Marilyn Chin, who's a poet worth reading, who said this, like 5 words: I lived in a world determined to erase me. You ever feel that?
I definitely have, and I continue to feel that. I don't think that the culture is comfortable with my self and my world and the people who I am most identified with. I think that was, in a way, the impetus to write my first book was to write myself into existence. And they literally have erased people of mixed race. Historically, that has literally not been allowed to be seen, or the people who made people of mixed race, like it's actually cut out of the story and it's unspoken. And so I think it's replicated in all sorts of ways with other people of color in particular, or just complexity in the representations of different people, and taking away the humanity and the contradictions and all the things that make us human are the ways we get erased. There's a great book. I teach a class at USC in representations of passing and performance in American culture. And one of the books we look at is by Donald Bogle. It's called Tom's, Coons, Mammies, Mulattoes, and Bucks. And it's all about images of Black people in television and film. And it's a really great primer for my students to be able to critically look at movies and television and not just consume these images they're getting when they see it as part of a historical, propaganda that has been very, very damaging. So,
yeah.
The word I like in the quote was what Marilyn Chin quote was determined.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's relentless.
That pressure, that relentless pressure. Yeah,
it is relentless, and it's one of the things I'm doing now is I'm writing these nonfiction books about historical events or periods, and I just the next one comes out in December is what is the civil rights movement, and then I'm working on what was the Harlem Renaissance. And the thing that kills me is these books are for young readers. They're like 3rd to 8th grade, and I have 7,500 words to tell them a giant chunk of history, and every act of editing kills me because there's something there that I want them to know. And knowing how much has already been erased, knowing how much I'm learning doing the research for these books because it wasn't taught to me, even though I had a lot of African American teachers and you know, a bunch of education. I'm learning things every day, and so that's painful to me, what we don't teach ourselves. So I think it's kind of cool. I think in New York there are actually freedom schools again, teaching African Americans about their history so that they can move aware and enlightened in the world.
What are those freedom schools? Are they
freedom schools? So during the civil rights movement in the 1960s, Freedom Summer, a bunch of students went down to Mississippi to teach African Americans, well, to educate them, because the education system was fraught, is a nice way of putting it. And so I've come across mention of freedom schools again. And I live on the West Coast, so I'm not really involved, but I came across mention of it, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what else is out there. And I think that might also be a response to what's going on now. It's on both sides. A lot of people need education.
Nice.
Well, here's a question from the audience, as they used to say. I'm going to read it off my screen. Has the response to your work on racial issues changed since George Floyd protests and Black Lives Matter? Has your response to your work on racial issues changed given those incidents?
I mean, I don't pay that much attention to the response to my work, and I also haven't published a new book in a few years. So I guess, but I mean, I'm interested in the conversation that it sparked, and the idea that it's all new. I think that people have been talking about this for a very long time in the margins, and suddenly you have like American Express putting, you know, check your privilege on their website, or Black Lives Matter on their website. And like, it's a little surreal to like have been writing about whiteness and white fragility and Black lives for my entire life, and to see my father and people before him writing about this, and have it be so completely ignored and erased, and then like suddenly it's like you worry that it becomes trendy, and that there will be this sort of high-pitched interest, and how it will be sustained and how it will be integrated into the culture as a deep knowledge and awareness. I just wonder about that. What do you think, Sherri? What's your experience with that?
Well, you know, I've had books that were Fly Girl is a light-skinned Black girl passing for white to be a pilot in World War II. And, you know, that book came out and it got some attention. But when it came award time, I think it was an uncomfortable topic. And
that's still uncomfortable.
Yeah. And so that was an uncomfortable topic. But the book was still popular, and it's still taught because it talks about women's issues and all this other stuff. But suddenly Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and I start getting emails from Hollywood going, so, you know, we see you have this book. We're somewhat you know, we'd like to know more. And I don't know what will happen there. It would be great if a story got out there that, you know, has some staying power. But as you said, who knows? So I think the response is to keep writing. Yeah. You know, just keep writing and keep telling those stories so that there's always something. Because if this is just a moment, then that will help fill the gap to the next moment and carry people along. I will say the civil rights book, I was writing it during all of this upheaval. I had almost finished it. We're in revisions. And partway through the book, we changed the title from what was the civil rights movement to what is the civil rights movement. And then my editor, who, God bless her, is a older white woman, she was like, your ending is too sunny. You need to like tell them what it's really like. Because I had this beautiful ending of John Lewis and Barack Obama walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge and like a couple of good quotes. And she was like, nope. And so that's out. And now it ends with like a list of names: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, like the idea that this is not over and this is always going on. And I'm glad that we were able to change the end of that book and dedicate
That's
it to
great.
But yeah, it's life is a work in progress, right?
At best.
Right.
We're coming up to the end of our hour, but here's a nice audience question. I think it comes from someone interested in what we think of as creative writing. And it's not, the question is, what is the best piece of feedback you've ever received on your writing? So not the best piece of advice you ever got about writing, the best piece of feedback you've ever received on your writing.
Not editorial.
Yeah.
Whatever we
Danzy,
want to interpret that as.
I just read the questions
You're
here.
not talking to them.
Yeah, I don't know.
I had my first novel, I had a lot of sections that were very poetic and I thought were so beautiful, and they were in italics, and my editor told me to cut them all. And the book was so much better without them. And I just remember like being like, those are my most beautiful moments, and killing your darlings.
Your darlings, yeah.
Yeah.
Good one.
I like let the language distract from the story, and I thought that the language was more interesting than the story, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I've done that a lot, and my editor at Candlework would just Sherri will mimic this. Nope.
Good. I know. I love that.
Yeah.
You get rubber stamp that just goes
And
on.
then the margin. Nope. And I think, okay, no long phone conversations. Nothing. No balm in Gilead. Don't feel bad, Ronnie. Nope.
That's funny.
That's a gift. And what about
yeah.
you, Sherri?
Yeah.
One of the things that comes to mind is I have this novel, speculative fiction book, Orleans, and I was writing at first person point of view, and my first editor on the book was like, no, I want it to be like this book I loved as a kid, so it has to have 3 different points of view. And I was like, I don't think it can carry that, maybe 2, but the third person doesn't have enough to carry a full third of the book. But I tried to do it, and then I was frustrated because it wasn't working. And a friend of mine, another writer, Rana Reiko Rizzuto, she reads tarot. I met her at a writing retreat at Hedgebrook in Washington State. And she said, do you want me to read the cards for your book? She hadn't read the book at all. And I said, yeah, please. I'm struggling on this thing. And she holds up this card and she's like, it's like a river with a rock in it. She's like, there's a rock, there's something stopping the flow of your story.
Yeah.
And based on this card, I see that there's 3 people and one of them doesn't belong there. And I'm like, I know exactly who you're talking about. And this is crazy. And thank you. And now I can cut it. And if he complains, I can tell him that the card said it was wrong.
I wish someone would do that. A tarot card for me. I love that. That's a great thing.
Yeah. She does offer
amazing.
Me too.
I love that.
Yeah. So I think we're getting ready to say goodnight. I think Kathy will come in and tell me if it's not, which we're a touch after 8. How are we doing? Kathy, there she is.
We're good. I think that if we're ready to wrap up, we can wrap it up. The questions that came in over the Ask a Question, I put in the chat, so there are no more audience questions. This has been fascinating, having read these books, and I know a lot of our staff have read the books, and we've had our book discussions about these books. And so it's just been wonderful to hear you guys talk about your work and the books. So thank you so much. I'm really grateful, and grateful to you, Ron, for bringing your special perspective to this. So thank you,
Ron.
It was really fun. Thanks, you guys. Yeah,
Thanks.
let's do it again.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you.
Available. People can watch this. This will be online to watch. So we'll send out that link. So anybody who missed it tonight will be able to watch it later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Great to talk to you.